Okay, I got a message with somebody asking me my point of view about something. The person's name is Saahene. Now, if this person is Arabic or Persian or Italian or Spanish or anything except for English and French, it would be saahene, something like that. But if it's French or English, it might be san or something. So the question is, I don't know if you take requests or not, but I'd love to hear your opinion on modern day comedians. In my opinion, they seem to like to say whatever they want while hiding behind the mask of comedy, and I think it's a little pathetic. It seems like they don't have enough guts to truly stick by what they say firmly, so they use sarcasm, bad jokes, and sometimes even unfair criticism, i.e., Jon Stewart, Stephen Colbert, Bill Maher. Uh, it's a request on the table. A vid would be nice. So that's it. Right. Comedy as a ruse. What was I going to name this video? Pseudo comedy as security blanket. Because the security blanket, like the Peanuts, that old cartoon, there was the kid that always had the blanket, and it's the thing that keeps you safe. And kids like to have a blanket, just something that keeps you safe. So, yeah, pseudo comedy. It's not really comedy, it's just something that you laugh at. That doesn't make it comedy. It's this blanket to hold on to because of all the insecurity. S man. I don't know how to pronounce the name. But listen here, S. Absolutely. They hide behind comedy. One of the things, my older brother, I have three brothers, three sisters, one above me, and it's my older brother who told me way back when something that made sense, and it's that comedy is the last bastion of philosophy. Now that would go against what you're thinking of other, but they're cowards not standing up for things or using unfair criticism. Nevertheless, it's the closest thing we have typically for pop culture as it relates to philosophy. So you can't just outright say philosophical things or you're being preachy. So you have to say what you don't mean and then they get you. Just like I can't tell you some pro-choice position or pro-life position. I can't tell you any political position, but I can make a caricature, an unfair argument, like you say of Bill Maher, Colbert, Stewart, of course, Bill O'Reilly, both sides of the issue. I can tell you what the other side thinks and just make it into this mockery and this caricature. But this isn't comedy. This is pseudo comedy. So we really don't have much comedy anymore. We certainly don't have philosophy. We have pseudo. We have really weak philosophy disguised as comedy, and the comedy isn't comedy. One of the things, like in Greek tragic, classical comedy, a comedy wasn't something that made you laugh like an idiot, so that you didn't have to, so that you could hide away from how miserable your life is. It wasn't comedy like nowadays. In classical Greek, comedy just meant like a happy ending. Comedy meant the person who needed to make the change made the change before it was too late. That was a happy ending. It was a comedy. A tragedy is when the person couldn't make the change and they have to live on having missed their opportunity to make the change when it counted. So comedy has more to do with just laughing like an idiot or even being happy. It has to do with thinking of things or having a certain pattern of behavior that works out well. But even ignoring the traditional denotation of comedy, the connotation is something that makes you feel good. Even we'll even give it something that makes you laugh. Now, in this context, I would defer to a very famous German philosopher named Goethe. And the way that he described comedy, I'm going to paraphrase, is that we find humorous. I improved on what he said quite a bit, so I'm going to give you what I said, but I got it from this guy. But we find humorous, interesting contrasts presented in a harmless way. That's what we consider comedy. The contrast is like this should be, and this is what is. Wow, there's a contrast there. There has to be a contrast. You can't just say like I was supposed to show up for the bus, and I did. It's not funny. I was supposed to show up for the bus, and it turns out I was at the airport. Ooh, you meant to do this, you did the other thing. That's a contrast. Now it has to be an interesting contrast. Like I was supposed to show up for a wedding, or I was supposed to show up to a wedding with wedding attire, but I showed up wearing a swimsuit. That's a more interesting contrast. The more interesting the contrast, the more humorous. But all along, it has to be humorous. or not humorous. It has to be harmless. If you have an interesting contrast, like you're not supposed to decapitate nuns, that's not harmless, so it's not humorous. But to some people, and this is where it gets interesting, and this is where I'm answering your question, to some people, that is humorous because it's seen as harmless, or at least they're so desensitized that they don't care that it's not harmless. So they can find humorous simply interesting contrasts because to them it's harmless as long as it's not happening to them. So you talk about decapitating a nun, that's funny. People got the dead baby jokes. What's the difference between a pile of dead babies and a Corvette? I don't have a Corvette in my garage. Ha ha ha, because you have a pile of dead babies in your garage. Why is that considered funny? One, of course, like I said, is because they're desensitized to the cultural notion that hurting people is wrong, but especially children is wrong. So they're desensitized to that, so it's still harmless, but it's an interesting contrast. You're not supposed to make a joke about a pile of dead babies in your garage. But again, this is a race to the bottom of people just, everyone's so desensitized. How can I shock them into being interested whatsoever? So no, we don't really have comedy. We have a whole lot of people who no one wants to listen to you if you just tell them, hey, this is the way things should be. So you have to wrap it in jokes, wrap it in anything except for just straight talk. They got sick of that when they gave up on church, or they gave up on their parents. They gave up on everything except for the sarcasm, as you mentioned, was the sarcasm and bad jokes. Right, once they start dealing with sarcasm, once they don't have enough self-respect to just say what they mean, they say the opposite of what they mean, and then they look at you like, you get what I meant, the opposite. I'm saying the opposite of what I mean because if there are any opponents of what I actually think, they'll hear me say the opposite, so they'll hear me say what they believe in, and they'll just go like, oh, yeah, I think so too. Well, good point. But everybody else that we know, really we mean the opposite. Now let's be over here and hide away. So that's really what it is to me. It is a bunch of cowards pretending to tell jokes when all they're doing is showing you how to let just enough steam off of your frustration and your confusion and fear of the world, because the socialization is telling you less and less about the actual world. It just tells you about what is politically expedient or socially expedient. So many people are just absolutely mired and frozen by fear, confusion, frustration, illusion, or disillusion. And comedy is that thing that serves you to go, well, you know what? I had a horrible day at work, but when I sat down and I knew it was coming, but it's still funny, that guy with the fuzzy hair went into Jerry Seinfeld's room really fast. And then what happened? He said, sorry I'm late. Some idiot was parked in my spot. And then right after he says that, the next guy walks in, sorry I'm late. I had to park in some idiot's spot. And then they look at each other and it's like, boing. See, that kind of stuff only sells to really unhappy people who aren't just off living life. And the last thing I'll say about this is comedy can really exist. Some people really get stuck on thinking, well, the only way to be funny is to say something really crude or really insensitive or to make someone the butt of the joke. You can actually find comedy and lightheartedness, levity, throughout your day. You can just say things that would be either considered goofy or silly, lighthearted. You can make observations and just have humor throughout your day. And once you do that, that's typically the way I am. Once you do that, that other stuff has no effect. I would never sit and watch somebody come into a room with fuzzy hair and go, hey, sorry, I'm late, whoa, because I have too much humor in everyday life. I'll compare it to holidays. Plenty of people, let's get together and enjoy ourselves. It's our holiday. Most of the days we hate ourselves. We hate everything. See, I make it a point, I don't celebrate any holidays. I make it a point to enjoy myself day in, day out with whoever I come across, wherever, even long before I mean, because this sounds like kind of a wistful way to be. Now I'm in a pretty helpless economic spot, but I still did that even before, even when I had my kids, when I was taking care of my kids every day of their lives. We found comedy throughout the day, so we never had to sit down, settle down, and go like, okay, now that we've dealt with everybody in our miserable way, let's watch somebody goof off and say the kind of things we wish we could say to our boss. And because notice that's what so much comedy is about, is the whole, some bad thing happens. Don't you wish you could just insert something here? But it's all about passive aggressive, all about unhappiness. But you don't need any of that. And just like I don't celebrate the holidays, I enjoy myself as much as most people. It takes a holiday. Most people it takes watching some show of somebody doing something goofy and outlandish. Ashton Kutcher showing people that matter punked, showing people that matter having a prank played on them, and you go, wow, that's somebody who's supposed to be just important and getting paid, and he's teasing them. that's the angle. That's the interesting contrast. It's like, oh, the celebrity and they're getting teased and it's harmless. That's what makes it funny. But again, it's not an interesting contrast to me, so I just don't find it humorous. Plenty of people will show me something they consider humorous, and I won't find it humorous. Like if you joke about somebody being naked, or joke about homosexuality, like, oh man, those two guys, haha. It's just not humorous. I don't find it an interesting contrast. Nakedness, for example. Some people say like, oh, a grandmother naked hitchhiking. They find that humorous. I'm like, well, it's not funny that she's naked to me because as we're all naked until we decide to be the little monkeys with pants. Look, we have pants on. So it's not funny that she's naked. She's old. That's not funny to me that she's old. She's hitchhiking. See, that's an interesting contrast because grandmothers aren't supposed to hitchhike. And it's harmless because we're insensitive rather than thinking, wait, naked grandmother hitchhiking, what happened to her? Why is she naked? Did someone steal her clothes? And, oh, come on, just laugh. Again, mindless people that are so insanely unhappy that they look for any kind of contrast that is interesting contrast, and they can justifiably consider it humorous or consider it harmless. I mean, for example, that's why we don't watch any movies where a woman gets kicked in the crotch. You don't see a romantic comedy where a man kicks a woman in the crotch. But you might see a romantic comedy where a woman kicks a guy in the crotch. Oh, I thought you were someone else. Sorry, it's my fault for such and such. That's an interesting contrast. You're not supposed to kick people. And it's harmless because it's just a man getting hurt. And there we see the fact that comedy can encourage the psychopathy of a culture. So there you go. Saahene. That is my answer to your question, more or less. And I call this pseudo comedy as a security blanket, keeping people numb and content with their disillusion, letting off just enough steam so they don't explode.